protagonist of today's story awakens after a lengthy sleep in the dark emptiness of the void. He wonders aloud what on earth happened, and finds himself unsure of how much longer he has been floating in the boundless light. He didn't want you to know that he was content just drifting around this area. A peculiar noise, nevertheless, jolted him out of his seemingly eternal state of ecstasy. At first, he believed maybe his dad had returned home, but he was completely mistaken. A system prompt greeted our boy, Anthony, with that sound. The system prompt outmannered the average person with its unique greeting. However, the following section of text was far from polite. It served as a somber notice of Anthony's death. He ought to have anticipated this kind of stuff. The prompt's voice was very unlike his father's. Where on earth might he be if he has passed away? He was at home reading a book carelessly, when his memory suddenly faded. Then, it's not out of the question that this region of limitless light is paradise. Where is the pool and unlimited food buffet though, if that is indeed the case? The computer system assured Anthony that he should not worry since he would soon awaken and be a part of life again, albeit in a different universe. The voice that spoke it was rough and deep, sounding just like that fabled figure shrouded in white who was worshipped with fervor on every continent. The system sounded just like Gandalf, so whomever thought Jesus was completely mistaken. As he was told that he would be reborn into the Pangera realm, where fate and chance would decide his fate, the limitless light faded, exposing a cloudy blue sky. Since the parting words implied that Anthony would be living a life full of adventure, danger, and chance at every turn, Anthony sought to beg Gandalf to wait since he wasn't ready yet. Perhaps fanciful beings and magical powers will also be there. Disregarding his chatter, Gandalf apprised Anthony of his situation upon his rebirth. He has 30 health points, no mana, 15 might, 12 hardiness, 25 cunning, and 18 will at level 1. He felt more assured after seeing the spread. He had written a compelling case. Perhaps he will become just like Tales of TLDA, the hero of his beloved video game. A more comprehensive description, however, said that he could dig, acid shoot, grip, and bite. Also included is his species, which indicates that he is a worker for hatchling ants. His aspirations of becoming a sorcerer will be dashed if his mana is non-existent. In addition to the strangeness of his talent list, Gandalf needs to explain himself. The acid shot is considerably stranger than the bite. Oh my god, where were his incredible MC abilities? The most concerning thing was that it was labeled as a Formica worker, a hatchling ant. He will be resurrected as an ant, and more specifically, a worker ant that has just emerged from its cocoon. Perhaps Anthony is being punished by Gandalf, the system, because he utterly cheated on someone in a previous life. That, however, is obviously not feasible, given his crippling introversion and the fact that his bookface inbox is completely empty. He clearly had very little social interaction in his past. He was harshly reminded of how lonely he felt without any buddies or any significant relationships. Go forth and make his own way in the world, Gandalf told him. It might be the route that the ant takes. That being the case, Gandalf is free to forge his mother as well. In utter disarray, the rough voice began to count down the seconds until the soul transfer began. 3, 2, 1. At the end of the count, it was as if the world went silent. With the announcement of soul transfer has been successfully completed, the hatching process is rebooted. Somehow, Anthony finds himself in an extremely awkward situation. As he trembled violently, his body experienced an unusual sensation, as if it were being compressed from every direction. Despite his prior skepticism, he is indeed experiencing a rebirth as an ant. This is actually taking place. He felt 6 legs as he examined his new, fragile body that was one item off the ant body checklist. His powerful jaws are in perfect working order, and he possesses 2 antennae. He identified 3 separate parts of his body when he counted from his head to the tip of his belly button. In the past, he kept ants as pets. Now, he himself is an ant. The dim lighting doesn't help, but the whole thing sounds like a bizarre nightmare. Where he is right now is darker than a moonless night. It's already dark outside, and the fact that his vision is so impaired doesn't help matters. But as Anthony continued to walk, he began to perceive a hazy, weak light. Something blue appeared at the tunnel's end. Thankfully, his color vision is intact, but he questioned his abilities beyond that. Perhaps he should put his newfound knowledge of ant anatomy to good use now. The use of antennas for environmental sensing was strange, yet he could detect air currents and scents he couldn't place. He must be underground, because the most noticeable odor was one of staleness. I thought ants could detect pheromones, right? Where is the colony, his fellow animals, without pheromones to guide him? Now that he gets a second opportunity at life, Anthony is determined not to spend it alone. After continuing to walk for a short while, he began to detect a scent that was similar to his own. Perhaps there was a fresh aloe just beyond the tunnel. Following the blue pulsating light will bring him back to his ant sibling, and all he has to do is hope nothing horrible happens. He eagerly hurried to find a fellow ant corpse as his joy intensified as he neared the exit. Even though he was bound and determined to lend a hand with whatever the colony needed, his arrival at the end of the tunnel was anything but smooth sailing. He appeared to be in a lot of difficulty, as his new companion floated through the air against his will. On the opposite side stood a hideous monster, its fangs bared in a gleeful exhibition. Rough scales formed a protective covering for the tightly packed muscles. For an insect as little as Anthony the ant, it was the stuff of nightmares. Now that the potential ally was out of the way, the reptile beast could smugly devour his victim. He didn't even finish the ant, he bit the unfortunate thing's body into bits first. Anxiety began to grip Anthony. He hadn't volunteered for this. He was merely an ordinary person who enjoyed reading in ant farms. This was actually taking place, despite his best efforts to deny it. For the time being, this is his life. Monsters smash ants and devour them. The imploring eyes of the second ant squished up against the monster's foot served as a rude awakening. In his position, what could possibly an ant do? Anthony, on the other hand, could only think of one possible move. It was his sole option. It was to sprint with all the speed that his freshly formed legs were capable of, run as if his life were in danger, because it was. Attempting to run in his new form, he was incredibly unsteady. Even after sprinting for quite a while, he lost his footing and fell flat on his face. He ought to have left that monster's domain by now. But what if another one happened to stroll down this tunnel and saw him as a potential snack? For his own survival, he had to abandon all human norms and adopt an ant mentality. He dug without thinking, as if it were second nature. He dug as furiously as possible. Knowing what an ant would do is easy, actually doing it is another matter entirely. He was merely scraping the ground because his legs weren't up to the task. Then it hit him. While watching his pet ants, Anthony had seen that they dug with their mandibles. Therefore, he had to essentially use his face as a shovel. He wasted no time sinking his trusty jaw into the uneven ground and began to gnaw on dirt. This is the definition of digging. Even though he only used his face for a few seconds, he accomplished more than if he had used his legs for several minutes. Once he reached the necessary depth, he fashioned a circular area with ample space for movement. Anthony the ant was finally able to lay on his back after establishing a new base camp. He had worked hard all day, and while he was now protected, other animals may see him and kill him. I don't understand how he ended up here. He had already encountered a terrifying beast before the day had even begun. Ants should give birth within a colony, where they will be safe and supported by other ant species. Things are not looking good, as he can tell from what happened to his colleague ant in the reptile's domain. There was probably a raid in the works because he wasn't the only one thrust into these desperate circumstances. After giving it some more thought, Anthony recalled that Gandalf the system had mentioned something regarding biomass and skill points. It is unclear what kind of planet Anthony currently inhabits. The civilization's substantial benefits were brought about by the system's descent, but they have lost all memory of what they lost. Returning to Anthony's predicament, he possesses a single biomass and a single skill point at his disposal. This is his chance to shine. There ought to be a screen for him to access, if this is a circumstance similar to a game. His initial attempt was kicking up his legs and yelling level up into thin air. He appeared foolish on top of the fact that it was ineffective. He had another thought, maybe this one will work. With an ear-piercing cry of status open, he determinedly swiped across the vacant space before him, and to his relief it worked. He was presented with a highly intriguing written prompt. Even if he couldn't discern whether his statistics were high or low, he could view them without any obstruction now. Grip was visible on the Talents tab. Perhaps it indicates that he will have good grip strength. According to its definition, grip is the capacity to firmly grasp and maintain contact with surfaces and things. The capacity to pass through solid objects, such as walls, is one use case. Upon reading that, Anthony's eyes gleamed with delight. His rescuer and Lord Gandalf the system may be making a triumphant and benevolent comeback at this time. Even if he's only a text box, his beard and eyebrows would be the envy of the world. While we search for a more fitting moniker for this laudable voice of blessing, Gandalf shall remain Gandalf for the time being. Anthony, blessed with the most valuable gift, the ability to acquire vital knowledge with only a thought, will praise that name. He realized it was critical to concentrate on choosing the correct choice after seeing his skills spread. Should he inject himself with acid? Perhaps he would reap more rewards if he could just get better at digging. Anthony must determine the extent to which Gandalf's abilities can be utilized. From what he understands, there are numerous ant species on Earth that can release formic acid from their posterior zone. Therefore, he must be one of those horrible ant species. This strategy could help you escape being annihilated in an instant by allowing you to attack without getting too near to your target. Although a ranged assault would be highly beneficial, his current situation does not lend itself to the utilization of equipment like his biting, crawling, burrowing, or spraying acid. Anthony is significantly underinformed because he does not know where he is or what kinds of animals live here besides crow monsters and ants. He has complete faith in his lack of voice cords, leaving him with no one else to turn to for information. It would be insane to venture down into the tunnels by yourself, considering the number of odd horrors that may wreak horrific harm. The thought of what could rise to kill an ant was already repulsive. In an effort to control his panic attack, Anthony had to take a few deep breaths. Maintaining his sanity is crucial to his survival. Following a self-motivational speech, Anthony became fully engaged. From now on, he can depend on no one but himself. All he has to do is spend his skill points. He has already determined his foundation skills. But the real question is, how exactly does he accomplish it? Gandalf personally prompted him to invest his skill points, thus the answer arrived right as he was contemplating it. It was impossible for him not to extol the virtues of this wonderful and sage disembodied system voice. He hoped that Gandalf, the one who brings light and hope, would stay as fluffy as before. Because of the abundance of choices, selecting the best one might be challenging. A rational approach is required of him here. When the going gets tough, being able to run quicker would definitely help him get away from his enemies. Having tunnel vision would also help him get around the subterranean playing field more easily. Bite and acid are offensive techniques that could enhance his fighting abilities when the need arises. Exoskeleton, mandibles, legs, eyes, antenna, and acid gland were among the body enhancements he could buy with biomass. It's safe to assume that he's the weakest of the locals right now, so he invested one biomass point into strengthening his vision, and used his one skill point on stealth, making him more able to hide and move stealthily. As soon as he received confirmation, his eyes began to swell up, as if a fire had been set in his cornea. A betrayal from Gandalf himself seems to be behind the abrupt agony. After rolling around on the floor in an attempt to take his mind off of the agony in his eyes, Anthony finally confessed that it hadn't been as horrible as he had imagined. Improving his physique, had he retained a human body, would have surely required an interminable amount of time. He is now prepared to face the challenges that the territory presents with his newfound knowledge. Crawling out of the tunnel, he regained his confidence and prepared to explore. He could see better. In the distance, I could not pick out any tremors or scents. He was given the option to go one of two ways. Since the beast devoured the other ants on the right road, he can't travel that road. So, he must walk left and face whatever challenges this path may bring. The anxious beetle had departed. The self-assured adventurer, Anthony, had assumed control. His speed wasn't terrible, and he crawled as quickly as he could. Since his journey was proceeding without a hitch, Anthony couldn't help but chuckle to himself. In theory, he should be able to improve his grasp and stealth by hanging upside down. The next step is for him to put his new eyes to work. His vision had improved somewhat. He discerned enigmatic blue veins that twisted and branched out of sight in the rocks. He is now able to perceive his own vital signs thanks to his enhanced vision. The delicate white exoskeleton of a newly emerged ant should stiffen as the ant becomes older. He crawled further until he reached the tunnel's conclusion, where a dazzling light awaited him. It originated in a cavern's blue veins and pool of water. Not only was the reservoir massive, but so were the beasts that hung around it. He nearly missed the terrifying creatures prowling around because he was fixated on the water. If he is indeed the weakest creature at the moment, he would be effectively killed if discovered. Being stealthy is going to be incredibly important for staying alive and getting the information you need. Everyone is aware that having poor eyesight is annoying, so let's not dwell on that. The transition from human eyesight to that of a pitiful ant was disconcerting for Anthony. He had a very poor field of vision for objects that weren't moving. Keep in mind that ants are social insects. A large colony is formed when many small ants work together. Ants work together to compensate for the awful senses of an individual. That's the exact reason why his situation is so bad. He has poor vision and is on his own. Nevertheless, he must find a way to survive even though he risks tripping over a sleeping dragon. He was hell-bent on making eye training a top priority and wouldn't rest until he could detect the twitch of a cockroach's antennae through 5 meters of solid stone. With the passage of time, Anthony's new red exoskeleton took shape. He began to hear terrible noises coming from all directions as he looked over the pool at the cliff. As he approached the walls, he realized he had to look closer. He had been clutching and racing to the peak for a few minutes when he was nearly at the sound's origin. Even with his sharper vision, he struggled to identify the exact location as he mapped out the terrain. With all those weird blue lines writhing around on the surface, he could hardly focus. Now that he could see the water pool's origin droplets falling from the ceiling, he could finally put his finger on what was making the strange sounds. Really, Anthony ought to focus, because there must be some detail that he is overlooking. He just couldn't make the connection, even though it was obvious. Naturally, such noises were being made by the monsters. Looking down from above, he heard the wolf beast howl and saw the dog's gaze shifting to him. He hastily took cover behind an out-of-the-way boulder since it was too near. Perhaps now is the moment to put his new skill to the test. In an instant, Anthony's red exoskeleton became see-through as he unleashed his brand New stealth mode ability. It made me sick. Now that his exposure is under control, he can calmly investigate this pool. He had a clear view of the vicious lizard monster that had come dangerously close to seeing him before. Stay tuned for the next noteworthy development, the return of the infamous crocodile, his archenemy, and the killer of his fellow ants. Regardless of his perspective on this enormous roster, Anthony couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. It seemed as if these menacing beings had quietly come to an understanding over a meal or something, because none of them were assaulting one another. Anthony didn't rule out the chance that he might have missed a meeting for a massive peace pact. He was well aware that remaining still would lead to no fruitful conclusions. Getting closer to the action might be helpful, but he has to keep telling himself that slow and steady wins the race. Because of his massive frame, he needed a few minutes to crawl down from the ceiling. If ants could actually perspire, the amount of water dripping from his body right now would fill up another pool in this mystifying cave. His workout wasn't in vain though. Now that he can move about with stealth active, it's at level 2. To reach the heart of the activity, he had to go quite a distance. It turns out his first hunch about abilities was right. They can be honed to perfection with consistent practice. By taking cover and watching, he might accomplish 2 goals at once: enhance his stealth skills and actively acquire valuable information. He had to shoot himself in the foot and get his ego down, since being arrogant was not a good thing. If he is discovered, he will be rendered useless. Once he calmed down, he approached closely enough to observe the subsequent group of creatures ambling around the lake. Beasts were entangled in a cluster, making it difficult to discern their true nature. As he approached, he saw a plethora of red eyes, blue pincers, and legs, hundreds upon hundreds of legs. When Anthony laid eyes on the centipede's hideous physique, he felt sick to his stomach. He needs some medication right now. This dungeon showed him something so repulsive. The lizard monster didn't appear so awful in comparison to the previous occupant of this ill-fated location. However, he must be cautious of those dangerous spikes. Anthony may be the weakest link at the moment, but he might envision a future where these horrible creatures may be used as biomass. Everywhere he looks, opportunities are just waiting for him to seize them, but he must first make meticulous preparations. For the following several hours, he watched the pool with great care, moving around it ever so slightly so he could remain concealed from the locals. He studied the animals' movements intently, paying close attention to their trajectory once they emerged from the pool. During the first hour, the centipede and crocodile monsters were the first to leave. Curiously, they were both making their way to the same exit. The wolf-lizard monsters were the second to hibernate. At 2 hours, they headed directly for a narrow tunnel near the southern end. The spiky lizard was the last to exit the water on the 3rd hour of observation. It crept up a wall before vanishing. We appear to be dealing with yet another wall dweller, similar to Anthony. If he didn't have to go hunting and eating, he'd tell the reptile brother to come get him. His stealth level increased to 3 during that tough spying session. Being patient pays off here. Additionally, it arrived just when his ant claws needed a break the most. At last, he had reached his way out, and the house site was only a single dig away. Anthony wanted to unwind, but he was strapped for cash. He needs additional space at his base camp, but there's more work to be done first. Some digging is going to be required for that. He enthusiastically began to chew on the ground with his powerful jaws. Instinctively, he gathered the dirt and worked diligently to secure his position. His achievement of successfully securing a nest was acknowledged with a notification just as he reached digging level 2. He was able to take a short break after digging like a lunatic. A wave of déjà vu washed over him, much like when his relatives stopped sending him money and forgot to fill the fridge with food. The rumbling in his belly signaled that he was beginning to feel hungry, which was nothing new to him. Waiting would be fine, he told himself. He could start hunting his first prey as soon as he woke up. He has his sights set on a pointy target. Indeed, the next day arrived at a whirlwind pace, and Anthony was presently positioned on the cavern's ceiling. He was so hungry that he was salivating at the sight of the monsters below as his claws sank into the cold rock, and it was the only idea running through his mind. But he was becoming weak and shaky from hunger, and he was beginning to run. As he gradually lost steam, thoughts of all the delectable foods he had in his past life began to swirl about in his head, including chocolate, bread, cakes, and steaks. He is experiencing hallucinations due to the extreme hunger. His previous encounter with the croco beast was so intense that he almost sprang from the roof to get a bite out of it because it looked so meaty. The ugly centipedes are beginning to resemble, more and more, a jumble of tasty noodles presented on a golden tray. Anthony must address his hunger problem immediately to prevent himself from accidentally poisoning himself by chewing on something he shouldn't. He has spent far too much time planning his next move to allow his stomach to hinder his advancement. What a short time. The preparations have taken up a total of 2 days. With painstaking precision, he examined this section of the cave. A combination of crippling famine and 2 days of almost little sleep has made it difficult for him to concentrate and remain awake. He came dangerously close to passing out from staring at the water basin upside down for so long that he almost fell in more than once. As he beheld the enigmatic pool, he realized that plunging into it would be an incredibly unpleasant swimming experience. Raising the ability to level 4 was a pleasant byproduct of pushing himself to his limits as a spy, with stealth mode activated the whole time. In his spare time, he has been excavating and expanding his hiding location, which has allowed his dig skill to reach level 3. Anthony's approach is to grow and prepare. That's how the powerless may take aim at the powerful. But hunger is a formidable foe, and all he could do was pray that he would soon be victorious over his first victim. With each twitch of his antenna, he could feel the target drawing near. Even at this early stage, he could detect the beast's foul odor. The moment Anthony caught sight of the light reflecting off of two reptilian eyes set within a groove, he knew the performance was about to begin. His prey of choice has taken up residence on the cavern wall, where it rests throughout the day before making the daily down to the pool for a drink. It's only a solitary monster, with a regular pattern of movement. You can kill it in a matter of minutes. Vaki lizard emerged from its hiding place to take its water of the day. Now is the moment to see whether Anthony's preparations have paid off in the form of a successful execution. He sneaked up on his reptile target by walking stealthily on the wall. They wouldn't have to wait long, he reassured his stomach. The mission will succeed once they get into the appropriate position to strike. Looking at the lizard's spines more closely, he realized that being stung by one would be humiliating, but he could not dwell on fear at this moment. Anxietyist he is, and his stomach is rumbling with his every move. He is so well prepared that he cannot afford to be distracted. When he pounces is the deciding factor. Without wasting a second, Anthony launched an assault as soon as his intended position became available. He was able to sneak up on the lizard, and then spray it with acid from above, damaging one of its legs. Since the first stage had been successful, Anthony was already secretly rejoicing. As it emerged from stealth mode, the lizard let out a piercing shriek of pain as its leg melted to bone. Phase 2 truly kicked in after the victim recognized the aggressor. Chastising the lizard by asking it whether it wanted to fight on the wall was like inviting disaster. Neither the wall nor the lizard would be able to withstand Anthony's tremendous grip, which is currently at level 3 because to all his espionage. The beast is slow and heavy, but he is agile and light, so he has the upper hand. Getting around the wall would be next to impossible with feet burned from the acid. The irrational beast, however, was so consumed with wrath that it attempted to knock Anthony to the ground using the might of its tail. Anthony leaped out of his excellent position for safety as the subterranean wall was shattered by some extra force put into the tail collision. He is currently literally playing with his meal, so everything is going according to plan. The lizard's face was the target of his next acid discharge, resulting in yet another melted wound and more agonizing sessions spent on the ground. Anthony swiftly jumped over the cave walls and repositioned himself for maximum advantage. The water resounded with the lizard's piercing cries for help. Now is Anthony's signal to finish this off fast because he will not stand by and watch while other creatures put a stop to the battle he has organized. As it began to slither away from the acid wounds, the lizard knew it was almost time to say goodbye. However, the lizard still had one more tail strike it could deliver before its vigor was completely depleted. Even Anthony couldn't have predicted this one. He was taken unawares by the lunge and the abrupt smack of the tail. Fortunately, he had enough room to respond and avoid because he was far enough away. With the lizard's last reserves depleted from an unsuccessful assault, Anthony's opportunity to put an end to everything finally presented itself in the midst of a panic. His mandibles poised to chomp and hold, he leaped from the roof. In the vicinity of the pool, there was a deafening crack. Since the last stage was approaching, Anthony was afraid to release his grip on the rough skin of his target. Last but not least, prepare for a test of determination. After situating the lizard underneath the beast, he lets it take the fall damage as he keeps biting relentlessly, till they ultimately go on a free fall from the wall. This is the world's rule, and food is food. He apologized when the lizard finally ceased moving and resisting. The acid shot has also reached level 2 as Anthony began spitting it all over the lizard's body in an attempt to penetrate its resistant skin. Leveling up was fast. Upon closer examination, he saw that the unfortunate victim was still alive. Looking like the following phase will be a challenge for both the predator and the victim. The ground was stained with blood and guts as Anthony indiscriminately chewed on the sturdy body of the dying reptile. Gruesome crunches resounded around the room. He reached level 3 with his bite after some time had passed. The gruesome task was completed after he spent a full 10 minutes on it. Anthony felt like a knight just returned from a death-defying fight. He felt like a daredevil who had just hunted. He was revitalized by the food. He arrived, he witnessed, he overcame sort of thing. Following the victory, he devoured his adversary. He has never worked so hard for something, now that he's giving it some thought. No, in his previous life he never gave himself any kind of push. He basically remembers being numb all the time when he looks back on his life. His level has increased to 2 now that he has vanquished the Spinetaliros of level 2. You have gained 1 more skill point along with the experience loss. With all the alerts, Gandalf became unusually chatty. The Spinetaliros is a name that sounds almost Latin, and that describes this lizard. Formica is his species assignment, so he was already familiar with Latin characters before this. We are to believe his interest in ant-keeping. The Latin word for forest ant is formica. If every living thing on Earth has a Latin name, then his literary acumen will definitely be useful. In addition to that realization, he gleaned 3 crucial details about his predicament. To begin, by destroying enemies, he can collect experience and level up. Also, at each level, he can gain access to a new skill point, which is a valuable asset. Thirdly, he can make 2 more assumptions about the Spinetta monster's level. Either it was born at level 2 or it managed to level up. And most importantly, he must not lose sight of his original purpose for being here to fortify himself with the flesh of his meal. Eating the flesh of both the strong and the weak allows him to gain strength, which is essential for a hunter or predator. The cuisine was much appreciated by Anthony, but the flavor of the lizard meat was very repulsive. I had to throw up again because it was so horrible. However, he has gained 1 point now that he has eaten meat from an unfamiliar biomass source. Gandalf simply couldn't stop babbling to him all day. He burped loudly instead of moaned when he lay down in the cave. At the absolute least, he should have enough food to last him a week. Not only does he have a full stomach, but Gandalf has also given him another bonus harvest. He should go back to his nest and think about what to do next. Anthony surveyed the monsters below as he ascended to the rim of the cave. One of their neighbors has gone missing, but they are so engrossed in the pool water that they have no idea who it is. When Anthony got back to his lowly abode, he slithered around for a while, before rubbing his hands together like a villainous mastermind. It was time to hatch a new conspiracy. It would be wise to first verify his current status. His statistics are essentially unchanged after the hunt, but his skill level has increased dramatically. He felt as small as an ant embarking on a daring journey and undergoing tremendous development. There will be no stopping him, not even when fate and unanticipated events collide. In spite of all the odds, he will prevail. But enough with the fantasizing for now. He must come down from his lofty perch and face reality. Now, Anthony focused on the here and now as he shook his head from side to side. Another critical decision awaits him at this very moment, and he must exercise caution. He needs to give serious thought to each decision, because he only has 2 biomass points to spend. He couldn't tear his eyes away from his eye mutation. For the love of the blessed light, he wished his eyes could evolve to +2. Anthony immediately confirmed the request to pay 2 biomass points to advance to the next level when Gandalf's voice asked him to do so. The sudden effect of severely burning his eyes for the purpose of improvement was too much for him to handle, and he despised the pain. It had finally ended, though the agony had begun to wet his eyes. He will have to make do for the time being with vision that is significantly worse than the ordinary person's. He must now allocate his 1 skill point. Fortunately, he possessed what is known as tunnel vision and had been planning to use it for some time, so making this selection shouldn't be too difficult. Although he has spent several days in this ill-fated location, he remains completely ignorant of its many facets. The world is full of mysteries, and he may need tunnel vision to survive in the long run. With this new skill, he can basically do more with every move. It would provide him the freedom to venture beyond his usual habitat while ensuring his safe return to his nest, his sole real refuge. A mischievous grin spread across Anthony's face as he joyfully obliged Gandalf's request for confirmation. He likened the sensation of learning a new ability to that of water running through his hair while he was in the shower, but this time it was happening deep inside his skull, so very different from the agony of the bodily alteration procedure. A little while later, Gandalf told him that he had developed tunnel vision. On his next exploratory journey, he hoped it would prove its effectiveness. Before continuing his exploration, Anthony made a bed out of fallen leaves. He earned a good night's sleep. The sound of approaching footfall disturbed his rest. 2 humanoid individuals were moving through a dark jungle, illuminated only by a single flashlight. "Did you see anything?" the woman asked the guy. "His mind has been playing tricks on him recently," he told her, "so it was nothing serious. Also, any monster that tries to harm them on their journey will have a harsh awakening when he realizes he is no longer hungry." As he slept, Anthony felt as if he were floating on air, completely content. He was startled awake from his dreamy paradise because of how pleasant it was, but he wanted to stay here forever. With some effort, he rolled out of bed and landed face first on the cold, hard floor. Dreams like that are usually implausible, therefore he should have anticipated their demise. Still, he was able to see clearly enough to stop fixating on things that would never be his. Now is the time to start looking for his next meal and creating a strategy. The Anthony smirked slyly as he got down to business. He had another idea he wanted to test. In his head, he summoned a mythical girl and yelled "unlock," while his antenna served as a makeshift heart symbol. Next, he attempted the search term's access profile. He considered following Gandalf's lead with Open Sesame as seen in the movies, but ultimately decided against it. One of those he truly believed would help him achieve his goal. Having eaten the lizard, Gandalf told him that he had gained access to the Spinetta Lazaro's basic profile, but that he was having trouble finding the correct keyword to use. Just now did it hit him. Perhaps he had been giving the process a bit too much thought all along. In an attempt to do a Superman landing, he let off of the ceiling of his nest, plummeted to the floor, and shrieked the lizard's Latin name. Wow, it actually worked. His first praise complete basic profile was laid out before him. In situations such as these, Gandalf truly had his support. One possible translation of the Latin name Spinocertos is thorn lizard. This reptile is armed with poisonous spines. That little piece of information was all he received after all the hardship he endured. It was disheartening, but Anthony had to stop being so dramatic. After all, it was already mentioned that it was only a basic profile. Maybe it's a cumulative effect. The more of the same species he eats and hunts, the more information he'll be able to access in his profile. For the time being, he decided to brush that problem aside. As he was about to embark on his next mission, he had more important things to take care of. Another day, another monster to make a prey. Singing while gliding across the ceiling made his return to the pool to spy on the residents feel much lighter. It appeared like nothing had changed since he had gone back to his nest. Following his feast, he made a little observation. With his Enhanced Plus, Do Vision, the pool below appeared marginally brighter than previously. In this jam, he was primarily interested in learning about the pool's water. He nearly became a crocodile lunch on his first day here, yet despite all his running, he didn't become thirsty. On the third day, he discovered the leaves that would serve as his bed, and he also didn't experience any thirst. He still hadn't felt the need for water, even after indulging in lizard meat on day 6. Even though every single one of those monsters went to great lengths to get a drink from the pool, and Monster Anthony wasn't even parched. I thought he was also meant to be a monster. When he doesn't feel like drinking the water, what gives him the authority to tell the other cave dwellers to do it? Does he or she vary in any way from him or her? Anthony had a clear idea of what to do next after considering those questions. After living to tell the story, he scampered down from the ceiling to examine the pool's mystifying water. Going down there could be extremely risky, therefore, it was prudent to move slowly at first. No matter how terrifying the centipede lump looks, he still needs to be careful not to run too fast or too far. From what I could tell, there were quite a few lizard-like species in this wet area, including the bipedal crocobeast and the spiky lizard. Some reptile trait or pattern is present in the anatomy of every living thing. He was so engrossed in his thoughts that he didn't see the wolf lizard approaching him with curiosity and fury. The dog started nervously backing away from Anthony right before it pounced, which confused our ant. What comes next? With a grin on his face, he was filled with excitement at the prospect of a new discovery. As far as the youngster could tell, the wolf lizard seemed cautious of the tall centipede when he glanced behind him. While Anthony narrowly escaped the wolf lizard's clutches, the centipede monster proved to be an entirely other matter. Their entire group hissed and slithered like repulsive mutant bugs, their red eyes fixed on a single ant. Anthony hailed the gods, thinking that his theory had been correct based on their lack of response. The survival-minded ant's risky move to emerge in the open in the pool area at this very moment may leave you perplexed. Surely there must be some good reason for him to risk death at the hands of these monstrous creatures. No living thing had ever been attacked when entering, drinking from, or departing the pool area in all his days of watching the occupants' conduct. It felt like a neutral ground. Even though there were several fights when the lizard was out scouting, the monsters never fought in the pool. Anthony was certain that the water force's ability to halt the monster's advance had more to do with its unique properties than mere hydration. He was curious about the pool water and knew he couldn't help but drink it, but he really preferred not to. Simply put, Anthony gritted his teeth, shut his eyes, and plunged his face into the pool to sip from the mystifying water. The water was so hot on his tongue that he wanted to leap out and turn over as soon as he felt it. The bit he swallowed set his inside organs on fire. Like chugging hydrochloric acid, that's how it felt. Had these countless beings truly come here for this, for some reason we don't understand? Was it true that they were actually making the daily pilgrimage here to drink the scalding water of death? If that's the case, then why were they all so flawed? Is a cave teeming with masochistic beasts where Anthony was reborn? Something was still lacking, and he couldn't get rid of it. There was almost little change to his health, other than the burning sensation. Given the film's box office success, he had high hopes for a dramatic event. Nevertheless, despite the monster's apparent fixation on a small amount of pool water, he saw almost no change. He figured he might as well go elsewhere in the cavern now that he had accomplished his mission. But before he did that, he couldn't help but take another sip. On this occasion, he gulped down as much liquid as his small frame would allow. It scorched like hell, just like the last time. Because he was in so much discomfort, he had to vomit up most of the pool water and roll around on the floor, spitting up everything he had just eaten. He came to the conclusion that it was really terrible. No matter what, he resolved in his mind to never do that again. He needed to broaden his exploration of the cavern to map its network using his new tunnel sense. Once he had partially probed the enigma of the pool water, he could now easily navigate by just heading towards areas with the densest concentration of light veins, thanks to his newly acquired talent. Beyond that, he began to detect an unfamiliar scent emanating from a distance. He began to wonder what other kinds of creatures might be hiding in these peculiar tunnels. While on the go, he racked his brain for answers and came up with something that seemed familiar. A man-made structure that could divide a huge vertical distance into smaller ones, allowing it to be bridged between lower and higher levels. There was no mistaking those for stairs. Anthony also saw the curving blue lines as he looked down the length of the steps. He hastily descended to get a better look because he was excited and curious. With elaborate carvings on each step, the stairs looked as though they had been cut out of the rock. Who, precisely, would be in charge of carving solid rock at this point? With much enthusiasm, he posed the question to himself. Of all things, people. This was the first hard proof he had found that this new world was home to any kind of humanoid creature. His mind kept wandering to the fantastical worlds these inhabitants must have lived in. In his imagination, Anthony could be facing the fabled and magical elves, famed for their beauty and longevity, or rescuing the powerful dwarves from an evil force that endangered their very survival. Whatever he faced, he couldn't deny that things were becoming increasingly intriguing. He began to wonder, halfway down the stairs, why somebody had bothered to cut stairs into this specific tunnel instead of the others. The response was almost obvious to someone with his level of self-confidence like himself. He was likely traversing a tunnel that was heavily used, therefore they had undoubtedly taken measures to facilitate its descent and ascent. As a result, it was highly probable that there were other stairs nearby. Maybe he could find a way to the surface, away from this dangerous and depressing cave. With that prospect in mind, Anthony mustered up the bravery to move forward. He exclaimed, "Here goes nothing," as he descended the spiral and discovered that the steps had more uses than he had imagined. It was unbelievable to him that he hadn't considered this possibility earlier. In fact, he could measure himself using these stairs. If the size of people in this world was similar to that in his previous one, he could use the stairs as a proxy for himself and get a ballpark figure for his size. Anthony found out that he might be slightly smaller than he had imagined after doing some calculations. He ought to be around 1 meter tall, according to the proportions of his steps. Hold on a second. If we were to stand on the pool's edge, we'd see all those terrifyingly huge creatures as quite tiny. From the vantage point of an adult human, they likely appear to be little larger than the average animal in the old world. Yet to Anthony they appear to be gigantic monsters capable of crushing their opponents with ease. Thus, Anthony begins to doubt the ease with which the creatures in this region may be defeated. Does that really mean they're easy mode tutorial monsters that are quite weak? On the other hand, if the creatures here are weak, he isn't interested in seeing what other, more formidable monsters may be lurking deeper within. That being said, he had made up his mind not to go head first into death this time. The perilous staircase has met its end for the time being. However, Anthony discovered even more indications of human activity after stepping off the elevator on an alternate floor. The walls were adorned with torches. More and more evidence of human settlement appeared the further he proceeded. Maybe we're closer to the surface than we realize. The further he ventured into the tunnel, the less noticeable the throbbing light veins along the walls became. For a snaky creature like himself, this setting was ideal, yet he couldn't help but feel that something was wrong. As he struggled to control his racing emotions, his heart pounded in his chest. Thrilling, isn't it, to think that we could meet someone from another planet? A plethora of inquiries were already prepared in his thoughts. Then, what are they like? Who will these amazing beings be? Are they familiar with magic? Perhaps there is a group of adventurers that go on dungeon crawls. Perhaps he might find a way to express himself to them through interpretative dance or sign language. Anthony's thoughts were racing, and he could already picture the revolutionary change in ant and human interactions that would have a global impact. It doesn't happen very often that people meet a monster with a human intellect. He was almost sure of it. Perhaps he is unique among his type. The narrowness and steepness of the tunnel began to increase as he continued his exploration. His already impaired vision was quickly obliterated by a dazzling light. If his observation was correct, sunlight was streaming in through a crack in the tunnel roof as he peered above. To his knowledge, this is his first experience with the sun. He begged the holy light to forgive him for his past life of squandering this privilege. He came to the realization that the surface and the outside world were much closer than he had imagined with the discovery of sunlight. It appeared like there were more light sources ahead while looking in the opposite direction, which would indicate that there should be more human construction. Just as Anthony was about to complete his thinking, he stumbled upon a wooden door that was half opened. Based on its layout, he speculated that it may be a guard room in the midst of a dungeon, to be exact. The crimson light shining from the window of the guard room, though, was the most intriguing thing. The combination of the sound of scurrying footsteps and the movement of this light made it unique. Who knew it was actual people, humans, clad in glowing armor and wielding a lighting gadget? Standing there in awe at their equipment, which might potentially detect the presence of monsters, Anthony could only stand and watch. These tunnels are so dim that it must be difficult to navigate and locate their target. With the gadget in her grasp, the man began to release a mystical light from both of his hands. Being there in real time made it all feel surreal, but Anthony thought it was magic. He was grateful to Gandalf for transporting him to a magical realm. Even now, he couldn't help but wonder if these folks would try to teach him magic. As our little guy was going ballistic over all the possibilities, the man began to raise his arms toward Anthony. "Excuse me, but I thought the red crystal might spot a monster." The fact that he lost track of the fact that he is also a monster suggests that it is active at the moment. A mystical spell was cast upon Anthony, and now he is lifeless. This was not meant to happen, was it? His error was minor, but at this moment he should have scurried away like a bug. Anthony yelled out, "Run, Anthony, run," in an attempt to beg the humans for forgiveness, but he was mute. The situation was further complicated when, on his approach to safety, he slipped on a rough rock. The Manhwa flame was rapidly approaching Anthony, and he wished he could explain that he was only an insignificant ant. He avoided physical harm, but the stumbling and sprinting had left him with aching legs. His thoughts told him to move, but his body was having none of it. As if caught in the heat of battle, further fireballs were directed at the helpless ant. In order to make the following run, he had to gather all of his remaining strength and use the columns as cover. Taking shelter didn't help, one arrow nearly penetrating his belly from a different angle. In order to escape this jam unscathed, he would require a potent diversion. But before he can go to safety, he needs to find a way out. He cautiously made his way through the maze of tunnels, utilizing his keen sense of tunnel feasibility to determine which routes were worth taking. Anthony eventually found one after navigating 3 different paths. The foul smell coming from inside is unbearable. He chose to battle like a monster and squirted a 2-way acid blast for each of the approaching humans. It failed to successfully halt their advance, and instead prompted them to fire a second arrow in response. Anthony ducked to avoid the whistling arrow, demonstrating his improved reflexes. There was one thing he could say with certainty: his effort at ant-monster interactions between humans had just collapsed. The one ant was being pursued by a barrage of fireballs, which seemed like homing missiles. After losing track of his surroundings due to his prolonged running, Anthony collided with a prominent rock. However, with Gandalf's blessings, he was able to survive and take a break within a narrow tunnel. As soon as he processed what had transpired, he began to scold himself for acting so foolishly. His human privileges were also taken away when he forgot to remind himself that he is no longer human. He had to start considering himself a monstrous ant, 1 meter long, in all his future interactions with people. Thrilling hissing noises resounded across the narrow passage. He had to pull himself together right away, even though he had made a mistake before. Considering the hissing centipedes on the opposite side, and the fireballs from the humans behind, Anthony had to decide which was more advantageous at the moment. His fate appeared to be sealed the moment the man who persisted in pursuing him with fire menacingly peered down the narrow passageway. The man's hand began to condense another batch of fireballs, and Anthony slammed on the throttle and began to flee for his life. Fortunately, he managed to vanish into thin air just in time to evade the spell's completion. He deftly navigated the underground tunnel's small passages using his tunnel sense, detecting that the group of centipedes was close by. He came up with a last-minute strategy. All he needed to do was lure the humans with the centipede monsters. Lucky for him, he could evade the terrifying hunk of noodles by using his cunning in secret. What happened when he sprayed acid on the bugs, which he thought would a surefire way to drive them away, would decide his fate. He doubted his ability to successfully escape the enraged horde, which would require him to race against the clock. He realized he had no choice but to remove his stealth mode and face the music. He had no time to waste. He cautiously positioned himself behind the cluster and began spraying the animals with his acidic projectile. A well-coordinated scatter shot killed nearly every centipede in the cluster, but the corrosiveness and force of an acid shot couldn't penetrate the horde's hides. No big deal. He wasn't planning on killing them anyhow, but he succeeded in his goal. He enraged the clump of poisonous centipedes. Their never-ending legs relentlessly pursued our unfortunate ant guy for days. The official start of the race against time had arrived. After a few minutes of intense sprinting, Anthony was already in tears at the chaos he had caused. It was taking an absurd amount of time to reach the entrance of the tunnel system. If he continues at this pace, he will not have enough energy to carry out the bait strategy. As he traveled, He had several near-death experiences at the hands of centipedes that swung their strong jaws at him. Anthony regained his strength as he beheld the end of the dark tunnel. Hope for redemption waited beyond this obstacle. The man was waiting for him to emerge from the small hole, where he would be burnt to bits, when he leaped out like a crazy bug. The man was taken aback when he realized it would be a massive gathering of insects, as the centipede swarm also made a daring escape from the hole. Anthony safely touched down. Amidst all the chaos, his only option was to flee. But it was no picnic when he was pursued by a terrifying crawling monster that had been enraged enough to follow him over the world. At this point, running would serve no purpose, so he simply drew himself in and chanted, "I don't want to die," over and over again. The centipede lobster began to explode just as Anthony reached him, as if his frantic shouting had reached the ears of a deity. You may be asking who was responsible for slicing and exploding the enormous centipedes. The people across the tunnel were, in fact, merely attempting to capture an ant. Not wanting to risk drawing unwanted attention or even physical harm, Anthony kept his head down. Is this his chance to get away from all this mayhem? He thought to himself. With great caution, he crawled across the battlefield, quietly excusing himself. If the remaining centipedes hadn't seen him and pursued him like stubborn bugs, it would have been an ideal getaway. He accidentally bumped into a human leg up front because he was so focused on what was occurring behind him. Carelessness caused Anthony to slide back just in time to avoid being stabbed from above by the human's twisting spear. Also, the spear that was supposed to hit him actually hit the trailing centipedes. Anthony thanked Gandalf the system once more for his good fortune. He had been spared time and time again by interventions orchestrated by a higher force. He was still in a lot of danger, but he wanted to appreciate the bearded wizard more. With any luck, he won't be able to fend off the two adversaries, the centipede beast and the human Melu guard, who are attempting to close the gap from behind. In the middle of the chaos, Anthony is able to activate his stealth after gaining some space. Thinking about where he can take cover, he plots his next move. Seeing an unlocked doorway leading to who knows where, he made up his mind that it had to be done. At least for the time being, he has found a place to hide by skillfully navigating beneath the doorway's walls. He watched as the conflict he had instigated between humans and centipedes unfolded. Pitting monsters against human guardians is something he hates to do, but he has no option given the circumstances. The choice was between allowing his neighbors to make war against the guards or dying at the tip of a human blade and exploding with human magic. Commander Titus, meanwhile, is hard at work in his office in the peaceful city of Elria, continuing to work well into the night. Because some stupid people won't let him and his legion handle the dungeon problem, the stress lines on his face have deepened. Instead of being locked up in a gloomy office, lighting candles and dealing with pointless paperwork, the old commander would rather to be out in the dungeon 24/7. Saying the same thing over and over again to clueless people has become his job these days. He was so frustrated that he nearly shattered his desk in two instead of getting to swing his treasured weapon. It was a wake-up call to take a deep breath and relax in the manor chair for a while. Forward garrison troops emerged from the dimly lighted office and rose to their feet in support of the commander. Commander Titus merely strode out of the hallways without a word of acknowledgement. A new group of neatly dressed soldiers rose to honor their brave commander as yet another hefty door swung wide. People would halt what they were doing whenever he went anywhere. In this place, he was worshipped as a deity. Two armed soldiers stood on either side of a plain wooden door as the commander continued on his way. Tribunalia painstakingly adhered to Commander Titus's demand for a summary of the situation. 15 minutes ago, a monster came close to this guard station before running away. The guards signaled the on-duty centurion and continued their advance into the cavern. From the point of view of the human guards, they were pursuing a hideous ant monster, something that merited the use of the most intense fire and blade. That rundown looked strange to Titus. He reiterated, if the monster did not attack head-on but fled instead. Without further ado, he pivoted to the plain wooden door, startling Tribune Orlia and inquiring about his destination. As for why he was personally joining the suppression operation, the commander nonchalantly said. The stories of a creature smart enough to run away from danger aroused Commander Titus's curiosity. In the midst of the fierce battle against the centipedes, the guard persisted behind the wooden door. In order to scorch the monsters, the sorcerers cast their most powerful spells. Mana was too strong for the centipedes, no matter how vicious they were. In the midst of the chaos, Anthony became trapped, relying alone on his stealth skills to escape unharmed. At this time, it was clear to everybody seeing that the human-beast conflict had devolved into nothing more than a bloodbath. Anthony couldn't do anything to help the cause of the war. He can't exactly use a long-range mandible strike to mince foes. When he is at a loss for what to do, he always turns to Gandalf for guidance. Someone he knew slapped him crisply instead of giving him Gandalf's advice. That was a person, Anthony. At a time when he needed a wake-up call the most, he thanked human Anthony. In a positive light, This string of unfortunate events has verified numerous things about which he had doubts. The first thing it does is prove that human-made spells can really work. Second, one can find human communities on Earth. Additionally, there is a huge strength disparity between his own persona and the humans. Another important thing he picked up is that HP is the most important characteristic right now. He was hit so severely by fireballs and stone shards that his HP was almost depleted. His HP had dropped to 15, nearly half of what it had been. At least he had a better idea of his fight damage threshold now. The lesson's price is that he must now figure out how to restore the lost hit points. He plans his return to the green zone and assumes his HP will restore itself in due course. However, it may need to be a bit more involved, and he'll have to find a way to manually treat his wounds. Whatever the case may be, he must not squander the fantastic chance that the war he initiated has bestowed upon him. An abundance of lifeless beasts spread out like a banquet. Some of them were even roasted in fire. There is a mountain of biomass ready to be devoured, so for now he needs to lock in. Anthony gives way to his baser instincts and devours opponents stronger than him, gaining strength and biomass at a rapid pace. Although he spent a considerable amount of time moving from one end of the buffet to the other, the harvest he reaped was abundant. At the end of it all, he was so full that he could hardly move or breathe. Like Gandalf had envisioned, he was merely visualizing a royal banquet the entire time. He thought the centipedes were perfectly prepared and dressed to look their best. However, as soon as the meat reaches his tongue and goes through his gastrointestinal tract, reality sets in. Nasal passages. These centipede monsters have an absolutely repulsive flavor. No matter how much of this vile flesh Anthony had eaten, the thought of it made him sick to his stomach. Forget about the flavor. What matters most is the amount of biomass he acquired. The fundamental characteristics of his target, the ooze scolopendra, were revealed by his feast for a king. Right away he cracked open the dreaded item, but it remained as useless as ever. All it said was that centipedes have powerful claws and poisonous spikes on their tails. A review of his statistics was his first priority before parting with his earned biomass. He has been making steady progress in terms of stats and abilities, and after a while his HP has even begun to heal a little. He can now spend his 2 biomass points on anything he wants.